Hey guys, welcome back to the Prehistoric Life podcast. I'm your host, Eric Crawford, and today we have another amazing guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. I'm Holger Petermann. I'm a paleontologist out of Denver. Um, yeah.
So, the basic question I like to start off every interview with is what is your favorite prehistoric animal?
Oh, that's a great question. I think my favorite prehistoric animal is an entire group of lizards called the Glyptosaurines. They're essentially an ankylosaur version of a lizard.
Those are a very unique group that is not usually heard among the community. Starting right into it, what first sparked your interest in paleontology and ancient life?
Well, I was born in East Germany, and before the Cold War ended, which meant I didn't have, like, my first few years, I didn't have access to like cool cartoons and stuff. And I remember I was playing soccer with a bunch of friends in a backyard, and my mom opened my sister's bedroom window and asked or shouted down, Holger, come upstairs, the Smurfs are on. Smurfs were a big thing for us, a great cartoon, which meant, though, that we finally got West German television signal. It's like early in 1990. And naturally, I finished soccer before I went upstairs, and I walk in, I'll never forget that. I walk into the living room, the television set was right across from the doorway, and I saw dinosaurs. And not knowing what a dinosaur was, not really knowing what a Smurf is either. I was like, that's the Smurfs? And my mom's like, no, you're too late. The Smurfs have ended. And I was like, what is that? And what I saw was the 1970s show Land of the Lost had come on right after a rebroadcast of the Smurfs. So I was like, those things are cool. What are those? And that's essentially what started it. First day of West German television.
So, when did you realize possibility could become an actual career choice for you?
Soon thereafter. So before I wanted to be a paleontologist, mind you, I was 4. Prime age to fall in love with dinosaurs, right? As 4 or 5 years old. Before I wanted to be a paleontologist, I wanted to be a zoologist studying cats and crocodiles. So I already knew there was a career in that. So pretty much as soon as I found out what a paleontologist is, I figured there must be a career in it.
Perfect choice. What path did you take academically to become a vertebrate paleontologist?
I studied in undergrad in Germany. You sign up for an entire course of study from the get-go, right? So you don't declare major or minor or concentration. You just you apply to attend a college for a specific course of study. And my course of study was geology and mineralogy. It's an undergraduate course of study. So I did that first. Had no biology training in that at all. Had very little paleo training, but I learned how to measure strat sections and all this other stuff. So when I was done there, I was encouraged to try something different, become a paleobiologist. And I started a master's course in West Germany that was specifically evolutionary biology, paleobiology, and organismal biology. And once I was done with that, I went on to a PhD in geology, geophysics. So I've essentially hopped between the two fields of earth sciences and biosciences to grab different concepts, different methods, different approaches and ways of thinking. And then that's essentially informed how I became a vertebrate paleontologist.
Who were some mentors or scientists who influenced your career the most?
I think the single most influence a scientist has ever had on me is, of all people, Dr. David Norman. He's now retired. He used to be at the Sedgwick Museum in Cambridge. But there was this, I don't know if you had it in the US, in Europe, a magazine series that started in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, called The Dinosaurs. And Dr. Norman was their scientific consultant who would answer questions asked by children, like the last page of each issue. And I was like, well, that dude's cool. So he definitely had the biggest influence. And then it's the standard array of researchers, right? It's whoever publishes seminal work in the area that you were specifically interested in. So for me, that would be Romer, Alfred Sherwood Romer, big influence in combining modern animals to infer past life behaviors and stuff. Richard Estes, who was a big paleoherpetologist, focused mainly on amphibians, but also on lizards, active in the mid and second half of the 20th century. Those would have been like big thinkers that I aspired to. And my PhD advisor naturally is a big influence on Jacques Gaudier. And then the people I worked with at the Denver Museum, like Tyler Leeson, James Hagedorn. Yeah.
So we're going to kind of shift away from some of those kind of early stages questions. Your research often focuses on reptiles like lizards, snakes, turtles, and crocodile relatives. What makes these animals particularly interesting to study in the fossil record?
Well, first off, if you study small things, you don't have to haul huge specimen jackets, right? So if
It's true.
I like to compare it, like if you dig up one triceratops skull, right, or one dinosaur skeleton, that's going to occupy your entire field season, your entire team, and that's all you're going to get. If I spent that same amount and I moved the same amount of soil, earth, rock, but I focus on the turtles, the crocodiles, lizards, amphibians, snakes, whatever, I'll get the entire ecosystem. All right, I'll get hundreds, if not thousands, of specimens that I then can study. That makes them valuable just from a practical standpoint, right? You get a lot more bang for your buck, a lot more research. In terms of questions you can ask, I find them uniquely exciting because all of those animals are largely what we call cold-blooded. So the environment, temperature, precipitation, they have an outsized effect on their growth, their maturation, their reproductive rate, and their evolutionary success ultimately. So they're great markers for shifts in climate regimes and tectonic regimes, all this stuff, much more so than warm-blooded mammals. That's kind of where I see them as like awesome specimen or groups to study.
You worked on fossils surrounding the KPG extinction. What makes this time period so important to paleontologists?
There are a few things. I think the most striking is the disappearance of all the non-avian dinosaurs. Right? That's just a uniquely, say, unhinged event. You lose the entire top half of your food pyramid, or your food chain, right? All the main herbivores, the main carnivores, they're all gone. Not just on land, but also in the sea, right? All of your mosasaurs go extinct, plesiosaurs. In the air, you get rid of the pterodactyls, the pterosaurs. In that, it's just bonkers thinking about that. But then it sets up all of our modern ecosystems, right? This multi-tiered rainforest that we have today is very different in the late Cretaceous compared to right after. All the large mammals, they wouldn't exist if the dinosaurs hadn't gone extinct. You see huge radiations, huge diversifications. It's another period of trial and error, but ultimately it sets up what we see today, and that's just what makes this event so uniquely important.
What kind of environmental changes do we see in the fossil record immediately after the asteroid impact?
Well, we see wildfires globally. It's not, and it's a blip, right? You think about that space rock hits, that's like a fraction of a second. It's that impact itself. Then within minutes, you send shock waves around the world. You set everything aflame within hours. And you have all of these ejecta going in. So the environments is like rock environments. They may not change much, right? There's an earthquake going through. So if you're near an active mountain range, you're going to see an event of coarser material being shed just because there's a giant earthquake. You'll get tsunami layers triggered by that impact. At the impact site, you're just evaporating probably kilometers of rock. So you see all of that in the organismic environments. You see, if it's a swamp environment, you have a heat pulse going through, you may actually get rid of the swamp. You might evaporate all of the water. You might evaporate the water out of lakes. You might evaporate the water out of rivers. You destroy most of the forests. And produce coal immediately, charcoal essentially. So you change the environments in that regard, but then right afterwards you get a succession of mushrooms, fern, early trees that don't need much, and animals that feed on gunk that's just dropped in lakes and rivers. Yeah, but it's all within like months, years.
It's a very quick event.
Yeah.
Your research in the Denver Basin shows dramatic losses in reptile diversity after the extinction. What surprised you the most about these findings?
How bad it is. So there was a study over a decade ago that essentially took a faunal inventory of lizards and snakes across the boundary for all of North America, and they found above average extinction rate. But then in the Denver Basin, it's even worse, right? If we assume that all the animals that could have lived, or all the different species that could have existed also in the Denver Basin, then we lose like 90%, over 90% of diversity. There is only one event in Earth history that does that universally for all life, and that's the Great Dying at the end of the Permian, right?
Yes.
So seeing similar extinction severity for a single clade, that's rough. And then the other side of it is how much abundance drops. Again, it's 90% thereabouts in abundance. So that's weird. And it's not just like there are survivors that I don't recover in the Denver Basin that are reported elsewhere. So why don't those animals survive, or why don't those animals reappear in the Denver Basin right after? So there's a lot of stuff that's weird about it. That surprised me.
We kind of touched on this earlier. How can small fossils like lizards and snakes, snake bones, tell us about ancient ecosystems?
Just through their presence. There are some great body size to diet ratios or correlations. Say you find lizards and they're less than 160 millimeters. That's just like 7 inches, 8 inches, from tip of the nose to beginning of the tail. Those animals will almost always exclusively feed on insects and invertebrates. So having animals in that range with the right type of tooth, you'll have a lot of insectivorous animals. And you don't always find the insects that go with it, right? So you know that if you have 20 different species of animal that feeds on insects for the most part, you know there's enough diversity and abundance of that animal group of those insects, invertebrates, to sustain that diversity, right? So that makes that pretty important and valuable. If you have snakes, there is leaf litter for the most part, or access to loose soils, because most snakes early on are fossorial. They live underground or in the leaf litter. Right, so you have that. If you find larger animals, larger lizards, there's this great clade of monitor lizard and Gila monster relatives. They grow the size of a modern large Nile monitor to Komodo dragon, right? But they're chunkier. They would have probably fed on small dinosaurs even. So so studying these animals gives you a pretty good idea of what's happening below the level of medium to large size dinosaur. What's inferred diversity, inferred ecology, inferred behaviors that you can expect.
So building on that, have you ever had like a holy grail moment in the field where you realize you discovered something that like is really special or just immediately answers a question in some way?
No, I don't get those moments, unfortunately, because I study the small things. I have to haul the dirt back, right? Then when I have the dirt, we at the museum we call them poop your pants moments. It's when you're right, those holy grail moments. I don't have them in the field. I have them under a microscope. And that's when you find like the first evidence of a lizard in a succession, in a rock succession where you don't have them, or you run an analysis and then I find it. It's really like post collection is when I have my big discoveries. I don't get to just like, some folks who dig in the desert and then they find like a new largest dinosaur. They immediately know this is the new largest dinosaur ever. That's exciting, but I don't get those.
Everybody wants to find the largest thing, but if you find the smallest thing, it's also pretty impressive.
It is impressive, but you don't see the smallest thing, right?
No. What's the most challenging environment you've ever done field work in?
I've done field work in Central Asia, in Southwest Kyrgyzstan. That was probably the most challenging because we had to haul everything from the nearest city and then stop at a bazaar city to just collect like fresh provisions. But there was a lot of corruption, so we actually had our fossils at the day before we were supposed to leave the field area. We had our fossils confiscated by the Forest Service equivalent under gunpoint. So they had Kalashnikovs and we had nothing. And they were like, you need to pay us a permit fee. And we were like, we don't have money. And they were like, yeah, you do. We know you do. So yeah, that was challenging in that regard. Other than that, it was really hot. It was the first time I was in a desert. There were no clouds on the sky. Living in Colorado, you get used to. But back then, 2 weeks without a cloud in the sky was pretty demoralizing. There was no wind either, so you just had the heat all day. It was too hot for insects and birds to be out, so it was dead quiet. And for the most of it, I was by myself. That was pretty challenging for several reasons. Yeah. And on the way there and back, you crossed an opium smuggling route. So, I think on our way up to the field site, we actually had like a convoy come the other direction with like armored truck and multiple like Toyotas with like, it was weird. It's challenging. It was weird. I would do it again, but it wasn't fun when I did it.
That's a different kind of challenge there. So, I mean, building on that, what are some of the most memorable field sites you've worked at?
Certainly that in Kyrgyzstan was memorable because there were great plant fossils. There were great invertebrate fossils. There were shark egg capsules in a freshwater lake that was pretty cool, and a channel lag, like a really coarse one with just a bunch of bones interspersed. That was pretty cool. I've done fieldwork in the remote areas, like the wilderness area of Petrified Forest National Park, and that's just beautiful to be in. All the colors, all the beautiful wildlife you see. You walk to your field site, you might see a pronghorn in the distance, just galloping off. Every field site is memorable in its own way. Did fieldwork in a limestone quarry, which is not very exciting, but it's one of 2 field sites in the Netherlands. And the limestone quarry just, they stop working for like a month in the summer. And that's when the paleontologists come in and just quarry.
You just take everything they want out.
Take stuff out and look for fossils. And it's just a great community, which made it really memorable. Yeah.
So also building on that, you helped study a dinosaur fossil discovered 763 feet beneath the Denver Museum during geothermal drilling. How unusual was that discovery? Yeah, sorry, we had some technical difficulties there. You helped study a dinosaur fossil discovered 763 feet beneath the Denver Museum during geothermal drilling. How unusual was that discovery?
Yeah, so that's a very unusual. I would say that's like a 1 in a million, 1 in a billion type of situation. You don't expect to find any fossils, any vertebrate fossils at least, when you drill, right? You expect to find plant fossils, maybe an invertebrate. You don't expect to find a vertebrate, and then a dinosaur, and it's a rare dinosaur. I think it's a thescelosaur, so that's really unusual. I think just finding a dinosaur is really weird in a drill.
What did that fossil reveal about the ecosystem in Colorado just before the extinction of the dinosaurs?
Well, we aren't we're quite a ways before the extinction. We're probably about 1 million years before the extinction, which I know in geology is a blip, but it was the first occurrence, if my identification is correct, it's the first occurrence of that type of herbivorous dinosaur, these thescelosaurs, which some of them, they have strong adaptations for burrowing. Would have been the first evidence of them like in a swampy environment, in a like really close to the mountains as they are coming up. So that's quite revealing. Other than that, not really that much.
But like, what was it like working on a fossil literally discovered under the museum itself?
And that was pretty cool. There is not much cooler than finding a fossil while digging at your own workplace, right? That was pretty exciting. So I think the non-vertebrate paleontologists and geologists, they were more excited than me because I had to drop everything I was doing and jump on that. It became a priority because we had, it was a project that the museum wanted to publicize that they were doing this core drilling. So we had to work on that manuscript really quickly. And that was unusual too, because usually I get to pick what order I work on my projects.
But I guess that was, that's a big publicity moment. So they're like, okay, I gotta get on this. Let's get on this.
Mm-hmm.
You've also done work with using turtle shells to understand ancient basin depth and geology. How can turtle fossils tell us about tectonics and landscape history?
They can help us by just physically, they behave essentially like a cylinder or a hollow beam. So you can apply some compression theories to their shells, and compression is governed by pressure. and density of the material you want to compress. Pressure is correlated to depth, so you can actually tell how deep would a turtle shell be before it cracks. Right? So you start out with your perfect turtle shell, you apply some pressure, then you hit critical pressure cracks. That's pretty close to surface. But then it starts behaving like the surrounding sediment. And you just try to minimize porosity at that point. So you can actually tell how deep a shell was maximally buried based on how flat it is. That's pretty cool, actually.
So building on that, some of these specimens that you work with are very tiny, so that fossil preservation doesn't always happen completely. So how do paleontologists reconstruct entire ecosystems from fragmentary fossils?
It's easy to reconstruct an ecosystem from fragmentary fossils as long as you can tell them apart. And as long as you can say something about their ecology, so diet, maybe landscape use, right? Are they roaming or are they staying at the same spot? Do they live in a waterlogged environment like a swamp, or do they like dry environment? Those are things you can tell from just the context of the find itself. Like, do you find, for example, if we find fossils in a dune sand, well, there was a dune there, so the animal lived and died in the dune. That's great for the ecosystem. So we know the ecosystem had at least part of a very arid habitat. You walk 100 meters, you're still in the same age bracket. All of a sudden you're in a lake. You know that the dune was right next to the lake. There was a little bit of a beach. You can keep reconstructing that ecosystem. You can start building food webs. You don't need complete specimens for that. If you want to reconstruct an animal, then the more material you have, the more precise your reconstruction can be. If you can identify the fossil to a species and you can place it in the context of what's the closest living relative, you can then reconstruct the animal a little more precisely.
So as, of course, time develops, we get more new technologies. What new technologies are changing the way paleontologists study fossils today?
I'd say in the last few years, the most important has been the advances we've made in computer tomography. We can scan larger objects now with higher resolution, and then you don't have to take there's this great presentation a few years ago, at 2 years ago, at a society meeting, where they took an entire partial neck of a sauropod dinosaur, long-necked dinosaur. They dropped the entire thing into a CT scanner. So they didn't have to prep every vertebra out, which meant they could actually reconstruct what the position was of each vertebra relative to another, plus the spacing. Right? So you get a much more precise picture of neck posture in that dinosaur. And that is just insane. When you don't have to prepare a specimen fully, that means you don't risk breaking it. At this point, everyone's probably seen the Berlin Archaeopteryx, right? It's one of the most aesthetically pleasing fossils on the planet. But when you compare really old pictures of it to more recent pictures, where you go to Berlin, you see it. The old pictures, you can see feather impressions on the legs. You can't see them anymore because someone wanted to study the leg bones and there was more preparation done. They prepped right through it. And that wouldn't have been necessary if we had CT scanned it. Another big advancement has become more and more isotope systems that we can use on fossils.
So could you go into how isotopes are kind of important and what they're used for?
Yeah, so you can use isotopes for various things. You can take the isotope signals of the sediments around a fossil. You get an idea of temperature, of humidity, sedimentation rates, all this cool stuff. You can take isotopes directly from the teeth, and their carbon and oxygen isotope ratios can tell you about, again, like climate, temperature. Migratory patterns, turns out, can also be inferred. And then there's this new field, relatively new field, of using stable metal isotopes like magnesium, calcium, iron, lead, mercury to infer environmental signals from teeth and dietary signals from teeth. So in the perfect world, you can actually use magnesium to tell whether an animal was an herbivore, an omnivore, or a carnivore, because magnesium is what makes chlorophyll green. So
more magnesium, it would be a herbivore.
More magnesium, in theory, and also like then heavier magnesium. I used to know all of this, but then I stopped studying it. Similar with calcium. Calcium is in protein a lot. It's the primary cation of apatite, so the bone mineral. Right. Yeah. And then in an iron, lead, they depend on the soil chemistry. So you get an indirect signal from those. A direct signal, though, of whether two animals you find in the same quarry actually lived in the same environment or the same place. There's great studies on modern mammals from South Africa that show that you can use those isotope signals to tell whether a lion was shot in Kruger National Park or in the Cape Province.
And is it easier or harder to do these isotropic analysis on smaller fossils compared to larger fossils?
It's so much more difficult.
What I figured.
In part because these methods are still relatively new, so we don't have, as precision goes up with these analyses, usually the amount of material you need to grind up and analyze goes down. We aren't there yet with these, and then because the specimens are so small, you get a lot less material. So I need just a fraction of a mammal tooth, like the equivalent of just like the tip of a cusp, to run these isotope analyses. But I need to grind an entire lizard jaw, like all the teeth. I need to clip the cusps off the entire tooth row, and I might still not have enough. That's how much more difficult it is.
So with that being said, how important are microfossils and tiny bones compared to these larger dinosaur and mammal fossils?
I mean, I'm biased. I think they're way more important than any dinosaur. But I think any large mammal is more important than any dinosaur, non-avian dinosaur. Just because there's no T-Rex stomping around my backyard. But I'm out in Denver. We have bison out here. The bison is important. The bison is an ecosystem engineer in the prairie. So understanding their evolutionary history is important. We have cobras and krites today, so understanding their evolutionary history and their fossil record is important. And I hesitate to give that same rank of importance to any dinosaur.
So what role does geology play in interpreting a fossil in ancient environments?
I think if you cannot read the rock record, it makes it a lot harder to contextualize the fossils you find. If you're out, you're collecting, you should take a measured strat section through the quarry. If you find things on the surface, you need to be able to reconstruct where in the rock does it come from. And it's easier to read that if you have a lot of experience in both collecting fossils and looking at rocks. So I think geology is super important in the field and then later in contextualizing your fossils. But biology is probably just as important.
In several of your studies, fossils aren't just about animals themselves. They're used to reconstruct ancient landscapes and geological history. Could you walk us through how paleontologists use fossils like turtle shells or reptile remains as clues to understand things like ancient environment, basin development, and climate?
That's a lot. So let's do basin development first, because I think that's all three are very different to address with the fossil record. But say you have the fortune of having an entire rock sequence, right? You have laws of superposition, Walters, all these amazing facies laws. And you find at the base of your succession, you find completely land-dwelling animals. And then you find animals that start showing signs of being also capable of swimming or other like more aquatic behaviors. Right? You have the rock record that will tell you that too, but you can more accurately pinpoint how the basin develops using fossils. It's easier when you don't use vertebrates, you use microfossils, you use diatoms, forams. You can even say something about where the thermocline migrates in a basin. You can say anoxia. Right? You can do a lot more with microfossils than you can do with any vertebrates. So for that, they're truly important, especially when there's a hiatus in the depositional record or you have a concentration of fossils. For the environments themselves, if you have aquatic animals, there was permanent water there. Unless they can burrow in, you usually find evidence. Like in the Permian Basin of Oklahoma and Texas, you find lungfish burrows. You don't necessarily find a lungfish in there, but you find the burrows, so you know that for part of the year, that landscape was exposed to the elements. It was dry, so the lungfish went in there, so it could hibernate or brumate. You can find, if you find animals that are like in desert environments, you know that they are desert adapted. If you find complete animals, you can say something about their physiology maybe. So it always helps with reconstructing ancient environments, and then plants are so much more important for that. You know you have a forest when you find tree trunks, right? You know you have grassland when you find a lot of grass spores or grass pollen. You can use all of that together to reconstruct the changes in the climate. Use leaf margin, for example, right? If you have rounded leaf margin versus like marginated leaf margins, you can say something about the temperature, cold, warm. Similarly, you find animals that seem to have shaggy fur, it's going to be cold climate. I hope that addresses that. It's really complicated. Well, complex question. The answers to each of them is relatively easy, though.
When you study reptiles and other small vertebrates that live around the time of the dinosaur extinction, do you see evolutionary patterns that connect directly to modern reptile groups today?
What do you mean by patterns?
in other words, how much of the reptile diversity we see now is shaped by the ecological reset that happened after the asteroid impact?
All of it, I would say.
All of it.
Right. So, not so much with turtles. I'll, I'll grant them that they're amazing survivors. And I think there are only 2 turtle species that go extinct in North America at that extinction event. Yeah, and
Turtles are doing well.
so sorry if there's a background noise. I think my downstairs neighbor is remodeling today. Crocodiles, similarly, there's not a lot, at least in North America, when it comes to extinction. But the lizard record is essentially sees a reset, a complete reset. Fortunately, a lot of the clades that were around before, they make it through. So we know that the ancestors of the green iguana, they're already around, they survive. And from 1 or 2 species that make it across the boundary, all of the modern iguana relatives, which is most of North American lizards, right? Your horned lizards are iguana relatives. Your fence lizards are iguana relatives. A lot of that. All of the skinks, skinks make it through and then become all of the beautiful skinks we have today. Snakes make it through and then become all of the beautiful snakes we have today. Monitor lizards make it through, Gila monsters, glass lizards, but in diminished abundance and diversity. So that reset allows them to explore new ecologies, new habitats, spread far and wide, and diversify.
So there is a pattern with, pre-dinosaur and post-dinosaur where we get more terrestrial crocodilian kind of style creatures. What would be the chance of something like that reappearing today?
That's a great question. I'm a firm believer in that if the evolutionary cascade is has progressed far enough, it's really unlikely. Never say never, but I think fully terrestrialized crocodiles is highly unlikely. I think the most terrestrial crocodile around today is the Cuban crocodile. And last I checked, that has been exterminated in the wild down to only 3 swamps.
Yeah, I think so.
Right, so that animal is very unlikely to be given the opportunity unless we release. Well, it's a very common farm croc for leather. If we release all of them in the wild, maybe they'll be more terrestrial. But there needs to be a selective impetus, right, for them to be that. I don't see any.
It's just odd that happened 2 times, which in the grand scheme of things isn't a lot. It's just weird that is something that reoccurred and then vanished, mostly.
Yeah.
The fossil record around the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary in the Denver Basin is unusually detailed. From your work, there were patterns. What patterns do we see in which reptiles survived the extinction event and which disappeared? And what do those survival patterns tell us about the traits of ecological strategies that help certain animals make it through these catastrophic periods?
So body size plays a role. I think in general, there's a body size reduction at the boundary. There's definitely a selective pressure against large-bodied animals.
Less food to eat, so less you can grow only so big.
Yeah. Then among lizards, it's carnivores. They vanish, at least from our record, and like strict obligate carnivores. They don't seem to be making it. I know they don't disappear because their lineages are uninterrupted. They persist to today, right? So they must have found a refugia somewhere, but not in the Denver Basin. And then herbivores seem to be hit really hard. And in lizards, herbivores today, they seem to like fruit and flowers quite a bit, because they have a lot of protein, and that helps them grow. You grow faster to sexual maturity, you reproduce earlier, sooner, and that just evolutionarily more successful. So I think those are the two hardest hit ecologies among lizards. And then so the smaller ones survive. The omnivorous ones or insectivorous ones, they survive. And in other animal clades, that pattern seems to hold. If you're a generalist, if you're not very picky with your diet, you do well. Or if you feed on the animals that aren't very picky.
You eat everything, you'll last longer because you'll always have some sort of food supplies.
Yeah.
Supply kind of general idea. One challenge with studying extinction events in the fossil record, in that the fossil record can be patchy. In places like the Denver Basin, where the record is unusually detailed, how precise can we actually get in understanding what happened right around the extinction event that happened? Are we talking about changes that happened over thousands of years, tens of thousands, or longer? And how do paleontologists determine that?
In the Denver Basin, we are fortunate. We get into thousands of years with the plant record, tens of thousands of years with the fossil record, vertebrate record. And I'm always looking for another locality that is closer to the boundary. Currently, my closest locality is about 130,000 years after the extinction. So at that point, ecosystems have somewhat recovered. The plant side of the ecosystem has somewhat recovered. Mammals are on the way to recovery. Lizards, not so much. Amphibians are. They seem to be going through the entire thing without a problem. And how do we know that it is that close? There's no like timestamp on the outcrop, but there is in the Denver Basin, because we're so close to the Rocky Mountains, and the Rocky Mountains are still tectonically active. Right? It's not like they're coming up in a major orogenic phase that has subsided somewhat by that time, but there's still volcanic activity. So we get occasional ash clouds, and they just drop a bunch of zircon across the landscape in these ash falls. When these ash falls hit a swamp, then you get a distinct ash layer, bracketed by, in our case, very often with lignite. So we can date those zircons fairly accurately. So we know how much time is in, say, a boundary section. And then we can calculate depositional rates. You studied geology, we expect about 1 meter per million years in an ocean, right?
Yes.
And we expect a much higher depositional rate, but fluctuating depositional rate in a continental ecosystem. So someone did the math a decade ago on these depositional rates for the Denver Basin and says it's about 1 meter per 10,000 years, 13,000 years. If I'm 4 or 5 meters below the boundary, I'm about 50,000 years prior to the extinction. 10 meters above, I'm about 120,000 years after. That's how we know it, because we have good friends, geologists, who can do that math for us.
So you mentioned that amphibians were doing well and reptiles weren't, and of course some mammals get on the rise because we're here today, so that's pretty strong evidence of that. What made amphibians? What made it so good for amphibians to thrive?
I have no idea. It makes no sense whatsoever. Amphibians are highly pH sensitive, right? If the water is too acidic, they should just shrivel up. There are no amphibians in oceans today, right? Because their skin is so permeable for water, they would just shrivel up like a prune. And we're talking about events that would have not just dried up their ecosystems, but also changed the pH value from one moment to the other. And I have no idea why amphibians don't have massive die-off in the Denver Basin. That's something I'm currently working on, is how many amphibian species actually go extinct, if any. Does it hit frogs harder than salamanders? And what happens afterwards? It's what it looks like is it's counterintuitive.
It's a very odd group because you would think something that would be able to survive in such a rugged wasteland kind of idea, such as reptiles are kind of usually more known for that kind of idea where they can survive in the middle of nowhere with nothing around. It's very interesting.
And it's like there are a few things I can think of that could benefit their survival. For example, if you don't have to go through a full set of metamorphosis, right? Amphibians, a lot of them go through metamorphosis. If they don't have to do that, that's probably better for them, right? Because then maybe they can get oxygen through their gills and all better, yada, yada, yada. That might help them. And then if they could, maybe there was this paper years ago, or a set of papers about like asteroid hit in the spring, right? Spring would be bad. That's when all the amphibians go out and have fun. But if it hit right before or in the middle of their time when they would have dug in, ruminated, maybe it hit during height of summer when it's really dry, or it hit in the dead of winter when it's really cold, then these amphibians may have been underground, hidden in mud, and they would have survived the immediate fallout, and then could have survived it's a lot of speculation. I'm really looking forward to doing all that research because that's exciting.
So, just purely hypothetical, mammals, the asteroid hits, mammals can't recover, but somehow reptiles do. What would the world look like today with that kind of?
It's a great question. There would be a lot more birds probably in the mid and higher latitudes. Who knows what would have happened to the oceans, right? The whales and dolphins are the main predators, huge ecosystem engineers in the oceans, huge source of nutrients. So who knows what would have happened there. But on land, the furthest to the north, the highest latitude lizard is Zootoca vivipara, I think, lives to 70 degrees north. So that's north of the polar circle, the Arctic Circle. But there's not a lot of diversity when you hit the mid-latitudes and you go further north. Snakes in 50-degree latitude, there isn't much. There's the slow worm in Northern Ireland that's in the mid-50s latitude. You don't get a lot of diversity, so that would have changed all that open space would have probably been occupied by warm-blooded clade, would have been birds. In the tropics, we might see more large-bodied lizards, and snakes. I don't know if we would have evolved, or if vipers would have evolved the way they have, because a lot of vipers are, especially pit vipers, they feed on mammals. So
They would have had to feed on other reptiles, which would have made things more difficult.
yeah, so who knows? It's a great question.
Maybe it would revert to like early Triassic, and it would slowly start over somehow.
Yeah, who knows? There might be a bunch of galloping herbivorous crocodiles.
I mean, something
That would have been a niche wide open, right?
Yeah, something would have eventually taken up the herbivorous niche, and would have just slowly, maybe just started over.
Yeah, and I can see there the evolution of more herbivorous crocodiles happening, or turtles, giant tortoises just roaming the prairie.
Like just a bunch of Galapagos tortoise, kind of those huge, massive. And then I guess if we're assuming all geological systems say the same, would the ice age that kind of followed that, like kind of
Yeah, the
much of them out?
planet would have still played out in the same trajectory it's played out, right? So you would still get a Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum. You would still get an Eocene optimum, cooling in the Oligocene, into the Oligocene, right? You would still have seen the same tectonic processes, same patterns, with the Drake Passage opening, get the circumantarctic current going, you cool the entire planet. Still get the ice ages. That's what makes it so difficult to answer that question, because warm-blooded animals are good at surviving in these cold conditions, just because we are not as dependent on warmth. But lizards, turtles,
I mean, I guess given enough time, they would have adapted. Maybe.
but like each one of those cold phases is just a few tens to 100,000 years, right? That's not a lot of time. So I don't know. It's rough. It's a really good question, and I'm sure we could model it, just like we can project the climate a few millennia into the future, or at least 100 years with some certainty. We might be able to. You certainly can run evolutionary models. You just give it some parameters. You just exclude warm-bloodedness from that. You let tectonics play out the way it played out, and you'll see what happens.
I mean, I guess the only huge thing would be, could a cold-blooded animal under the right conditions become warm-blooded, or during those thermal maximums, were there places that were warmer where something could survive?
I mean, we had alligators up to 80 degrees north, right, on Ellesmere Island. That was during the PETM. So we had these, during those blimps, animals rapidly expand their range, right? There's open ecology, like open ecosystem, they'll move in.
So
I don't know.
It's not impossible.
I don't think they would have adapted to it. They might have become like gigantotherms when you're big enough that your internal engine runs, it produces enough heat, right? Produces enough heat so you can survive, but who knows?
So, kind of wrapping up here, what discoveries do you hope paleontologists will make in the next 20 to 30 years?
20 to 30 years, I hope. I hope my astrobiology friends will find evidence of ancient life on Mars. That would be pretty cool.
It would be very interesting.
That would be great. There are discoveries surrounding the mass extinctions that for me, it's what makes something survive is the big question. There, the big dying is so weird because you lose so much and then everything comes back. So what gives a lineage that evolutionary edge? We're working on that, constantly making discoveries. Finding more little lizards that help us describe their evolutionary history across the planet, right? Right now, it's all centered around North America, basically. We have a good record here. We don't have a good record elsewhere. So
find a good record somewhere else. I mean,
countries that are currently hardly accessible or inaccessible altogether, right? We just 15, 20 years ago, Angola started cleaning up mines in a lot of their wilderness regions. We haven't explored the highlands in Western Africa that much. We don't have access to much of Antarctica. And the only good thing about melting glaciers is more rock is exposed.
True. It's the only plus side there. So.
And those are basically find new things in places we haven't looked at.
I mean, even looking in like recent history, the Sahara with the new Spinosaurus. I mean, if that's out there, I mean, who knows what else is out there? It's just so difficult to access anything there because it's such a harsh climate.
Yeah, and you need to, like, us Westerners, we have a long history of dropping into foreign places, taking everything we can, and then carrying it home. But that doesn't help people connect with their geologic history in the country that we rob, right? So here's the other thing. There's not just making discoveries. There's also creating a more balanced research. There need to be national museums in all of the countries, I think. There need to be national programs in paleontology in all of the countries so that people can collaborate, not just go in there and do colonialist research. That's my little ethics statement. Basically, let's do better than our forefathers. And I'm hopeful that my generation, your generation, and following generations are going to do that.
So going on to the flip side of that, what part of paleontology excites you the most today?
I'm excited about lizards, so that's the obvious answer there. But I think there's a lot more studies now that look more holistically at ecosystems. That excites me when you're not just applying one method to understand a pattern, but you're combining methods, computational methods, you're combining taxa, lizards and mammals and amphibians, whatever. You marry that with a good idea, you get to address evolutionary questions and paleo questions much more completely. And that's exciting.
So finishing off here, what advice would you give to someone who wants to become a paleontologist?
Don't. I don't know. It's an exciting field. I think paleontology lets people stay in touch with their inner child. So that's awesome. But so do other fields in science. If you want to be a paleontologist, I think what is important is that you don't forget that it's the marriage of two fields. You need to be fluent in biology and in geology. Being fluent in only one of them makes you good, may make you exceptionally good, but I think you need to at least be willing to learn both. And then see as many fossils, as many rocks, and as many different conditions and situations and ecosystems and depositional environments as possible. yeah, then just toughen it out. It's not an easy field to be in. If you're in it to study dinosaurs, you might have a career, you might not. If you're in it to study lizards, same thing. It's
all about what will get the revenue in.
Yeah, funding.
It's the big one. Well, it was an honor having you on. I really enjoyed having you come on and talk with not just me, but everyone who's listening to this. Do you have any final things you want to say before we end it?
Famous last words, so to speak. Well, just thank you very much for inviting me. This was fun.
Of course. But for everybody else, I hope you all have a great afternoon, morning, evening, night, whatever time it is for you. I'm your host, Eric Crawford, and remember, keep it prehistoric. Bye.